Educational Communications and this station present Environmental Directions with Nancy Perlman. On this series, we explore the effects of human influence on the Earth's ecosystems and discuss solutions to environmental problems which affect the quality of life on this planet. Environmental Directions gives you the kind of information you need to help you participate in decisions impacting your community and your nation. Now, here's your host, Nancy Perlman.
Hello. For the next half hour, we're going to be talking about the impacts on the marine ecosystems, especially salinity in our coastal environments due to climate change, the rainfall and snowfall patterns, with professors from California State University, Los Angeles. With me are Carlos Robles, a professor of biology, and also a member of the Executive Committee of the Cooperative Institute on Marine Ecosystems and Climate, which is part of NOAA. Patrick Krug is an associate professor in the Department of Biological Sciences at Cal State L.A. And Hengchun Ye is a professor in the Department of Geography and Urban Analysis here at the California State University, Los Angeles. Welcome. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Pleasure to be here, Nancy.
Thanks, Nancy.
Thank you for invitation.
Professor Robles, perhaps you could begin by explaining the multiple interdisciplinary work that you're doing to try and understand how the altered rainfall affects our coastal marine populations in animals and plants.
Yes. Well, there's little doubt that the climate is changing rapidly and under the influence of human activities. Usually when we think about the impacts of global climate change on ecosystems, we think of elevated temperature. But in marine systems, there's another factor that's often overlooked, and that's changing salinity, or the saltiness of the water. So as climate patterns change, rainfall changes, snowfall changes, and so the runoff into the ocean and patterns of the saltiness in the ocean in space and time are altered. And that's what our particular group at Cal State L.A. is going to focus on within the larger institute of CIMEC.
Professor Krug, you are particularly involved with looking at the distribution of the coastal animals as they are impacted by these changes. What's happening?
So a lot of research has looked at how changing temperature regimes are leading to range shifts. So as things get warmer, southern species tend to move northward and northern species retreat towards the poles in order to stay within temperatures that they can survive. Something that hasn't received as much attention is what the future impacts of changes in rainfall and snowmelt are likely to be for coastal animals. So when it rains or when the snow melts, that puts a lot of fresh water into near-shore waters, and that can drop the salinity a lot. And so something that hasn't received as much attention is how those changes are also impacting populations. So I'm studying species that range up the California coast and trying to understand how temperature and salinity together set the limits to where species can occur.
Professor Ye, you are looking at the bigger picture beyond the coastal marine community and how what we're doing on land is affecting what's happening in the oceans?
Exactly. The precipitation research has been done actually at global scales. But for California West Coast, it's very complicated because in general, under global warming, people believe that precipitation will increase in the northern part of the continent, or decrease in the tropical, subtropical. California, basically, we have seen increase in north and a decrease in the south. And in the central California, it's undecided to what's going to happen. That is only one aspect of the precipitation magnitude. But we also found that climate change causing change in the frequency and intensity of precipitation. So even you don't see much amount of change, but you will see a much stronger storms, which means one storm system bring in a lot more fresh water, which really shocks the salinity system in the coastal area. And in addition, the change in the precipitation characteristics is a solid, foam, or liquid. We know California has high elevation, that a lot of snow. Snow is a major water resource for the entire West Coast. However, it's going to change because temperature gets warmer, the snow may become rain. And the rain can happen as a rain on snow event that melts snow faster. So they're causing the spring flooding and the freshwater recharge earlier and a more severe event that really can disturb the whole ecosystem area.
So all of you are looking at changes that are happening due to the changes in our environment as the climate changes. But yet, scientific research has to have some sort of base study. How long have you been looking at the particular populations of animals so that you can actually determine if there was a change and is a change?
That's a good question, Nancy. Actually, I've been looking at the organisms on the shore in the Pacific Northwest for about 25 years. We have a very long data series, but as Hengchun points out, what we're looking at now is kind of a stealth factor. I mean, we might see a sudden change in a shore community and not realize what caused it if it's being incurred by salinity, because one of these episodic events, you'll have a freshwater inundation and you can't see that, it's all clear water. But all of a sudden this one episodic event that's easy to miss will completely transform a community. So in recent years we've deployed a series of Salinity Monitors. These are really nice high-tech devices. They look like a giant Tylenol capsule that we glue onto the shore, and they can log just gigabytes of data recording minute by minute what the salinity is there. And we have grids of those out on the coast. So we can catch these episodic events of low rainfall and detect them and see where they occur so that it's no longer so stealthy. Now, you mentioned a little bit earlier about, how it's interdisciplinary, and this is where the interdisciplinary part comes in, because we're taking these sensor arrays, which is a problem in informatics and in spatial analysis, and we're using them to interpret the rainfall pattern. That's where Hengchun comes in with her understanding of precipitation and watersheds. And then we couple that with the field ecology, which is what Pat and I do. And it takes a whole village to understand these potentially complex changes.
It's an advantage for my aspect to support their research is the climate data has been there for a very long time. In California, some stations go back starting 1980 something. So we have lots of long period data. We can look at the general pattern and trend, and with their current, they may have a couple decades of recent observations, so we can see what's happened in the past and then combine with current what's going on, so give us a better picture of what's going on in the future.
Yeah, so for example, I studied two species of these little sea slugs that live in estuaries that are heavily impacted by freshwater runoff, but that are normally in full strength salt water, just like anything that lives in the ocean. And one goes from Southern California up to the San Francisco region, and another one comes from Alaska down south to the San Francisco Bay region. And so I've only been studying them for 8 years because I'm much younger than Carlos. But we can already see short-term effects of climate perturbation. So for example, last year was an El Nino year, and so when there's an unusually warm summer, we can see the southern species push farther north than it ever normally occurs and push out its competitor. And then in the following winter, when there's much heavier rainfall than usual, we see the opposite. So the southern species will push farther south and will show up in places we never normally find it. And then 6 months later, the system goes back. It restores the equilibrium that we normally see, and everything's where it's supposed to be. And so one of our goals is to figure out how to model the status quo, so to understand how temperature and salinity and competition affect the distribution and the abundance of these animals. And then Hengchun can come in and tell us, well, here are some possible future scenarios. So here's how rainfall patterns or how freshwater runoff might change in the next 50 years. And we can plug those forecasts into our model and predict how the biological communities will respond.
You say you're working with sea slugs and with other mollusks, and Professor Robles, you're working with sea stars. And some people may say, who cares about these animals?
Well, I confess to being an odd duck. I mean, I'm really completely enthralled with these things. But there is a bigger meaning. They're what we call model systems. So, for example, we know an awful lot about human genetics right now, and that's what we're concerned with for our own health and for economic reasons. But much of our understanding originated in fruit flies, which we call a model system for chromosomal genetics. In the same way, the organisms we're looking at are model systems for this kind of a longshore choreography, this spatial reorganization that we've been talking about. So Pat's working with a twin set of species that evolved from one another that are sea slugs. I'm looking at a community of barnacles, mussels, and sea stars that's a model system for predator-prey interactions. And in my particular model system, what goes on is that the freshwater incursions shut down the activities of this master predator, the starfish, and allow a undefended prey species to come in and dominate. That species is very tolerant of fresh water, but is undefended against predation. If you don't have those freshwater incursions, it's replaced by a very closely related sibling species. They both evolved from the same common ancestor. But this other species is defended against predators, but is very sensitive to fresh water. So it's this kind of organization and indirect effect that I'm looking at. And essentially here, freshwater is a switch mechanism for completely alternative communities. And that switch mechanism works its way out through the predators.
Sure. So I would just want to riff on what Carlos is saying. Model systems is probably one of the hardest things to get across to the general public. At a cocktail party, the two questions that I'll always get asked if I start talking about the critters that we study is, what's their job? What is their role in the ecosystem is sort of my translation of that. But what do they do and why do we care? And so the biologist in me will always want to answer, what do they do? What is their normal role? What's their place in nature? But the why do we care part, I think, often just defaults to the fact that we want to understand really complicated things, like how driving my car to work every day is going to impact the temperature, and that in turn will impact snowmelt and the timing of runoff, and then how that's going to affect thousands of coastal species. But I can't study it all at once. So I have to pick really simple systems where we can start to identify the effects of these factors.
To me, it's an opportunity to collaborate with marine biologists. It's very exciting. As this semester, I try to start to prepare in Cal State L.A. my graduate seminar. My seminar is applied climatology research. I try to find any kind of research has done on this area. I found none, basically. So as applied climatologist, it's a very exciting area where I get into a very new research area that people haven't looked at before.
As you say, the scientific studies can be quite complex, take quite a bit of time, but yet ultimately help us understand how better we should be living. And if I am beginning to understand some of the results of your preliminary research, it's that humans are changing the environment to such a degree that we're getting more rainfall, more non-salty water going into the salty water, affecting the plants and animals in the ocean environment, and that then affects the various kinds of populations that these animals can and will have.
Yeah, that's correct, and it's not just increase in the fresh water in some areas. I mean, some areas it's going to become less salty, other areas are going to become much more salty. So we're interested in what this choreography that we observe tells us about how the communities are put together and how they will react to this anthropogenic or human-caused problem.
Well, we're going to talk more about this important issue about the changing temperature and salinity regimes as they affect the coastal animals when we return in a moment.
Environmental Directions with Nancy Perlman continues with further discussion of the world's critical ecological issues. For more information, you may call 310-559-9160 or write to Post Office Box 351419, Los Angeles, California 90035. Additional information is also available online at www.ecoprojects.org. That's ECOPROJECTS.org. At the end of the program, we will give you this information again. Now, here's Nancy.
I'm here at the California State University, Los Angeles, speaking with Professors Carlos Robles, Patrick Krug, and Hengchun Ye. They are biologists and climatologists who are working to try and get a better grasp on what kind of changes are going on in the coastal marine communities. Professor Robles, could you also explain why you are involved with this NOAA Cooperative Institute on Marine Ecosystems and Climate. I know that it's because you're really trying to promote diversity in the environmental sciences.
Well, we have really a twofold mission, and the first prong, you might say, of that is the excellent science. But we use that excellent science to also drive superb research training in our students. And State L.A. is kind of an interesting campus. It's very diverse. The face of the State L.A. student body looks like the face of Los Angeles. You have every ethnic group that makes up this country represented in profusion. And so one of our roles will be, as we train our student body, is to prepare them with the right skills to enter the environmental science workforce. And NOAA has a very keen interest in diversifying its workforce. A recent Pew Foundation study determined that underrepresentation in the environmental sciences is probably the most acute of any professional discipline, and there just isn't really any diversity in the environmental sciences. And that's something NOAA, as a national organization, has a keen interest in. The CIMEC Center is the only such collaborative institute in the Southwest, serving the Southwest. And so it's an issue really of representing the consent of the governed and serving the people that are constituency of this area to give them this kind of education and to help place them in careers.
Professor Krug, you're specializing in animals here along the California shoreline. Will this research be applicable to what's happening to coastal communities in other parts of the world?
Wow, okay, I hadn't thought about that one. The answer is probably no in the specific case of my research here in California. It's very specific to our coast, but this is one of the most populous coastlines in the world. It's ecologically very fragile, it's economically very sensitive, and it's also a place where there's a lot of people who care about the environment. So if you can identify things that we could actually do better, I think California is one place that people might actually do a lot of those things. I think the research is regionally important and useful. And like Carlos was just saying, the environmental sciences are not ethnically very diverse, but Southern California is. And so part of our mission and our involvement with NOAA and other partners is to try to increase the representation of the people that live in the Southwest in the scientific community that's trying to grapple with the issues that affect those communities.
Professor Ye, you're looking at snowfall and rainfall as it affects our coastal waters. Is it different in other parts of the world than here in California?
The climate has regional characteristics, but I'm trying to add with Dr. Krug comments, even though we are looking at very specific species, however, the methodologies, the way we are looking at the problems, the way we solve the problem can be applied everywhere.
What are the special problems that you're finding in doing this kind of research? Is it difficult to get out into the field and to take those tests? Do you have all the resources available?
Well, the life's blood of research, unfortunately, is money. It's very expensive to do this, to take a team out there and to use the kind of technology that we're using.
You're using things like remote sensing or something called automated data acquisition. What is that?
Automated data acquisition are these little sensor devices that have some wonderful computer technology on board that allows them to log just gigabytes of data. They will take the salinity and surface temperature of the water that surrounds them every 10 seconds, record that, and do that for a year. And so we have grids of these out on the coast collecting that information. Then we download that into computers and apply some wonderful analysis called geographic information systems analysis that makes us able to print out some beautiful dynamic maps, some actually kinetic moving maps of the salinity and its pattern over time. We take that and we couple it with simulation models about the current flows and oceanographic processes, overlay on top of that biological models that tells us how the organisms will respond, and we get a prediction of how these changing patterns will flux across the coast. This sort of what I'm saying is the choreography of communities. So that's a very high-tech enterprise. Takes a lot of time and expertise to do it, takes some fancy hardware. So yes, we're always interested in resources to be able to do this sort of exciting genre of research.
It's sort of funny, though, when you think about scientific research and all the costs associated with it, the sensor arrays are actually cheaper than paying for people. And I think the hardest research to come up with is actually the support for the students that we train. And I'm going to brag a little on Carlos because he probably won't say this, but he was instrumental in bringing a $9 million center to Cal State L.A. that was called Seacrest, and the bulk of those funds went to train and develop the human resources of our undergraduate and our graduate students who were primarily from underrepresented minority groups. And so it takes a lot to really develop the talent pool that we have here, but I think it's worth it. These students go on to have careers that they probably never would have considered if those resources hadn't been brought to bear. And I've seen the remarkable things that can happen to a campus when you actually have the money to train people and to put them into the environmental sciences.
And add to that, because Secret Center, I got to know you guys. Otherwise, I would never know you people. So we won't be having a team together to do some meaningful research.
I know that some animals are very difficult to study in the wild. Sharks, whales, they're not always there ready and available for you. But there are some animals that pretty much stay in a particular territory and you are able to gather the information you need?
Yes, you asked about model systems, and that's really what we have here. We've got a system of very dense populations. Everything's miniaturized, these barnacles and mussels, by the thousands across the rocks. They're easy to map and experiment with. And in a way, the wonderful thing about these model systems is nobody cares about them except us crazy marine ecologists. They care fervently about them. And that means that we can do experiments with them. We can manipulate their numbers, we can move them, we can subject them to the various conditions that we could never do economically or ethically with any other species.
Humanely.
Indeed.
Yeah, so the two species that I study, part of what makes them so fascinating to me is that they are incredibly predictable and reliable. And so that allows us to make predictions when things happen in a consistent way from year to year. So for my guys, every September, like clockwork, the southern species shows up in San Francisco Bay after having been absent for 6 months. Every January and February, the rainfall puts a hurt on them and they disappear. And then like clockwork again, every February, March, the northern species shows up and persists for about 6 months. And so, I was with my students in Northern California this week. We had to drive back at 8 o'clock at night. We got here at 3 in the morning. They had to go and put the slugs away. But one of the nice things we can do is actually go out, collect our animals in the field, drive them back to Los Angeles, and then do experiments with them in the lab. So we don't actually have the problem of a shark researcher who's trying to, measure things about a great white shark out in the ocean. We can bring these guys into the lab, and so we can understand very intimately their biology, their physiology, and then we can also go out and observe and measure them in the field.
Obviously, you as scientists want to gather data that will ultimately help human understanding of the planet that we live on, and that's commendable in and of itself. On the other hand, we, the citizens, depend on scientific information to be able to establish policies and programs and behaviors that will give us a healthy environment to live in. And so even though I know as professors you want to wait till all your studies are done and all the results are in, I don't think that's going to be possible as the changes going on with climate change are happening so fast. What would you advise the average person to do and be involved and how to care, and what should they change in terms of their behavior?
Be a good citizen.
Well, certainly be informed, and there's plenty of opportunity to work on a local level for conservation. We brought up the issue of California. I have to say, California really does lead this nation in its environmental policies. If we were to adopt some of the emission standards and vehicle efficiency standards that California has nationwide, we would do a lot towards meeting our commitment to other nations with respect to the emission of greenhouse gases. This is local action, this is political action. So if we're informed and we're involved, good things happen. And I have to say that really the NOAA Institute, because it's NOAA, it means that we scientists are hooked in with society. We are trying to do good within the society and meet society's needs. We mentioned human resources, and then we mentioned studying global climate change. And, what we will do with this information is to help environmental managers make informed decisions. But NOAA has an outreach to the public that informs them of this information and the decisions and hopefully, if we do our job properly, the wisdom behind it. We're not in the ivory tower, especially when we're working with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration with NOAA. We are plugged into society and trying to all work together on this.
Perhaps with the little time that we have left, you could sum up the research that you're doing, what results you have found, what you hope to find. Professor Hengchun Ye, you are in the Department of Geography and Urban Analysis as a professor here at California State University, Los Angeles. Where's your research going?
Well, I'm looking at all different components of precipitation, not precipitation, but the water vapor, how the water vapor in the air is going to change with temperature, which is going to affect the other components of hydrological cycle. So try to find some theoretical approaches and the real what's happening. So compare both.
Is it changing?
Yes, it is changing.
Professor Patrick Krug, you are an associate professor in the Department of Biological Sciences here at California State University, Los Angeles. What do we know more now about those particular animals that you're looking at?
You know, I study a species that ranges from Japan to Alaska, all the way down the coast to Northern California, and then it just stops. And then you drive 5-10 miles further down the coast and you find a different species that ranges all the way down to Southern California. That's really rare. It's very unusual for a marine animal to have just a line in the sand, literally, that it doesn't cross. And so it's kind of a unique opportunity to get a handle on exactly what says where a species can occur and where it can't occur. And I'm very fortunate in a way that both temperature and salinity are involved in setting those range boundaries, because it lets me work with my awesome colleagues here at Cal State L.A. and get the students out in the field, get them engaged in environmental science.
So you're finding that the line is changing because the salinity has changed?
I am finding that where the line is drawn has a great deal to do with the amount of rainfall that local areas receive. So I was really surprised to find out that Bodega and Tamales Bays, they're about 15 minutes apart. They differ pretty dramatically in how much rainfall they get in a typical year. And that matters. That influences what species you find there. So by understanding, again, the status quo, what we see today, I hope that we'll be able to predict how different climate change scenarios will impact these communities. Scientists like to make predictions and then test them.
Professor Carlos Robles, you're in the Department of Biology here at the California State University, Los Angeles, and you're also active with the Executive Committee of NOAA's Cooperative Institute on Marine Ecosystems and Climate. How has your research been going? What do we now know that we didn't know before? What do you want to find out for the future?
Well, I have to say that the interpretation I gave you about the barnacles and mussels switching and a switch mechanism, that's still a hypothesis. But underlying that is an idea that's come up that I've become really intrigued with, and that is this idea of sudden change due to switch mechanisms. Looking at paleoclimate, doing studies looking at what the climate was tens of thousands of years ago, we're discovering that the Earth can switch from a warm period into an ice age in the matter of a decade or two if certain switch mechanisms are tripped. And it seems like the same process may be going on in some of these coastal ecosystems. In our particular case, it looks like through the effect on a master predator that salinity is a switch mechanism for alternative coastal communities. And this idea of sudden change, I think, is going to be very important in the whole debate on global climate change.
Are you able to say at this stage that we definitely have to stop the climate change, stop the global warming so that the marine life can continue in a healthy manner?
I think the real issue for us is the uncertainty and just whether we want to live with the uncertainty. You know, there's been quite a bit of argument as to whether or not global climate change is real and whether it's anthropogenic or human-caused. I think those people that have really looked at the data and worked with the scientists realize that it is happening and that we're driving it. We don't, however, know what all the consequences are. We're realizing that some of the changes may be sudden, some of them may be very serious for us. So we don't exactly know where we are on this trajectory, but it's clear that we need to start understanding it and taking positive action.
I'd like to thank you all so very much for providing us with the important research that is so critical to our understanding of what's happening in our environment so we can take appropriate actions. And thank you for being my guest.
Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
I have been speaking with Professors Carlos Robles in the Department of Biology, Professor Krug in the Department of Biological Sciences, and Professor Ye in the Department of Geography and Urban Analysis here at the California State University at Los Angeles. I'm Nancy Perlman. Thank you very much for joining us, and do tune in again next week.
If you would like free information about these vital ecological issues, contact Environmental Directions at area code 310-559-9160 or write to Post Office Box 351-419, Los Angeles, California 90035, or go to www.ecoprojects.org. That's ECOPROJECTS.org. Environmental Directions with your host, Nancy Perlman, is a community affairs program of this station and the nonprofit organization Educational Communications.